guess Rocco, you're up. He's a constitutional lawyer, and he's currently working on many things actually, but this is about the Comer case that's upcoming. I don't want to steal any more of your thunder. Thank you.
Well, I don't know. You know, usually at the Supreme Court, I get 15 minutes as an intervener, 45 minutes as a respondent, and an hour as an appellant. I have 5 minutes to explain to you the Bank of Canada lawsuit. If you don't know about it, you're not going to get an explanation from me, okay? Essentially, in very broad strokes, the lawsuit, which was filed in December of 2011, is a constitutional challenge to the Bank of Canada and the Minister of Finance in refusing to give interest-free loans to the federal and provincial governments, which was the central reason the bank was set up initially in 1937. That was the reason the bank was set up. So these loans could be given to the federal and provincial, and at the time directly to municipal governments, for up to a maximum of 1/3 of their annual budget, so long as that 1/3 was paid back the next year, which, if you look at the numbers, is easier to do. And so this is how historically we paid our World War II debt. We paid for the Trans-Canada Highway, we paid for the St. Lawrence Seaway, and we paid for the explosion of the building of universities in the 60s and 70s across the country. So that is the first, in a broad stroke, challenge to compel the two levels of government to request and to rekindle the primary purpose that the Bank of Canada was set up to do. And it's couched in a lot of different constitutional challenges. Also challenged is the joining of Canada to the Bank of International Settlements, and everything you heard from Ellen Brown there is pleaded in our case, the history of it, in terms of our being linked with the BIS, the IMF, and all the other foreign private bankers who actually give our public bank, the only public bank in the G20, its marching orders. The minutes and the minutes of the meetings that our bank governor has with these other bankers, even though he reports to the Minister of Finance and Parliament, he claims are held secret and we're not allowed to know the content of those meetings. That's also being constitutionally challenged here. We're challenging the government for relinquishing and advocating its constitutional duty to govern under various provisions of the Constitution Act. The other part of the challenge, which goes hand in hand with this whole banking fraud that's going on, is against the Minister of Finance and the budgetary process. What happens in the budgetary process every year, which is a constitutionally required process where, you know, they all dress up in medieval clothing and they knock on the House of Commons for the speech from the throne. That's actually a constitutional requirement. Since 1215 in the Magna Carta, because only Parliament can impose taxes, Parliament will not impose taxes, cannot impose taxes before the government tells the House of Commons how it plans to spend that money in the next session. And so it's a requirement. The speech from the throne is a constitutional requirement before the budget is actually passed. Problem with the budget in our country is there's a sleight of hand that goes on, and that is, just to give you an example, they'll say, you know, that our expenditure needs are $280 billion. We're going to have revenue of $240 billion. Therefore, we need to borrow $40 billion, and that's our deficit for the year. Well, that's not true. They collect or could collect a lot more than that, but then they transfer back to taxpayers, running from everyone from the single mother or single parent to mega corporations. They transfer back money in tax credits. And then they say, we have 240 billion, we need to spend 280. And why is that significant? That's significant because if they're collecting 400 billion, the MP should know that, because then they can have an intelligent, if they're capable, I don't know, maybe half of them couldn't do it, but if they could have an intelligent debate on whether or not they want to run a 40 billion deficit or shave the tax credits and run a balanced budget. And so that's a very nasty sleight of hand that's going on with our budgetary process, which we say is unconstitutional. Now, it's coincidence. I don't know if it's coincidence, that since 1974, when the last interest-free loans were made to the governments to meet their budgetary needs, every time we've run a deficit, it's been very close. It's been very close to the interest payments on our debt. So usually if you look at a budget, usually the deficit that's run in deficit years is to finance the interest on the accumulated debt from deficit to deficit. It's like the old opium wars in China. We've been forced on an interest addiction from the banks. Now, the reason they say that they don't want to make interest-free loans from the Bank of Canada is they claim, Minister of Finance perpetually claims that there'll be an inflationary pressure, which is a metric ton of horseshit, because the Bank of Canada, and especially the Federal Reserve in the last few years, the Federal Reserve has been given interest-free loans to the private banks. Our primary lending rate is 0.75% as of this week. So the private banks get their money from the Bank of Canada at less than 1%, and they lend it back to our government at 3.5%, and we pay the bill. So if the Bank of Canada giving money to the private banks at nearly 0% isn't inflationary, why would it be inflationary if they give it to the government? Because it's going to be paid off in the next fiscal year anyway. And so basically those are the two broad stroke challenges. The statement of claim runs about 25, 26 pages. I mean, it's more involved than that. You have to set out what's going on. At the first level, the government brought a motion to strike the whole claim, saying it was not justiciable, that the courts didn't have the right or the expertise or the wherewithal to hear the case. It was struck. I appealed that on behalf of the plaintiffs. I was successful at the second level, where the court said, well, we had nominally sued for $1 for every Canadian on a class action. The court said, forget about the tort and the damages, but you can pursue the constitutional declaratory relief with respect to how they're managing the bank and with respect to the budgetary process. The government has appealed that. I've partially appealed part of the order. What the judge says, I'm going to strike these portions, but not these portions, but redraft the whole statement of claim. I don't want to redraft the whole statement of claim because I don't want to go for another round of a motion to strike. I'd rather proceed on the constitutional relief. So on Monday, we're before 3 judges of the Federal Court of Appeal to determine how much of this, if any of the case, is to go forward, because the government has appealed the order that the constitutional relief can go forward. And so we'll see what happens on Monday. I'm not a pessimist, but I am an optimist with too much experience, so I'm not going to predict. And from there, it's likely to go. If we lose, we go to the Supreme Court of Canada. You need permission. If the government loses, I know very well that they're going to seek permission from the Supreme Court. So it'll have to go to the Supreme Court of Canada to decide whether the case actually proceeds, and if so, to what extent. So this is why cases don't get litigated in Canada. We're going to the Supreme Court in order to determine whether or not my clients can proceed in court. And this is very typical of all government cases that I do. We go through this round of motion to strike. All right, so that's in a nutshell the case, and I always make my presentations brief because I find it more beneficial. If people have questions on it, I'm happy to answer. Yeah.
Just 2 days ago that I read the decision of the judge on this appeal. Sorry. Just 2 days ago, I read the decision. And so my understanding isn't as clear as yours.
Sorry?
But in that decision, there was an element of accuracy, I thought, in that in your submissions on claim, you had not verified that these elderly people and this unknown organization represented all of Canada, and that even these people had not been wounded in a serious way. Right. Well, I want to identify that I was wounded today. If there's $60 billion of unnecessary interest paid, this is $1.1 trillion, as Ann mentioned earlier, right. Then today, every Canadian, not just me and people here, paid right. $5 of unnecessary interest. Now, if that doesn't destroy our country, then you add up the $1.1 trillion and say, well, how many hospitals could we build with that that we didn't build, that we farmed off? How many transportation things and how much energy facilities and so on. That's where all of us have been wounded over all those years, and we're still being wounded. So that damages is explicit, and it certainly should be revealed to the judge on the.
I don't disagree with you. I think there, if you want me to guess and read behind the lines, is that the court is concerned that when you pursue a tort claim for damages, it will involve witnesses and witnesses and witnesses. And what the court is really saying is, in this decision, is your real beef is with the constitutional issues, which is true. We're not really after damages per se. It's with how the bank has been turned into a useless appendix. And so what the court is really saying is we can determine that in a 100th of the time in terms of judicial resources that we can a lawsuit that will require all these witnesses. So let's get to the nub of it. And I don't, although I'm representing my clients, I don't necessarily disagree with that point of view. Okay.
You have access to the hard data, is the point.
Sorry?
You have access to the hard data that is required to back up that claim.
Yeah, we do, and it's pleaded, yeah.
Yeah, we have another question up here. Go ahead.
Hi. Hi, my name is Stan Tucker. I'm from St. Mary's. First off, I'd like to thank you, Rocco, and Ann, and the Commer Committee for this gigantic task you're taking on here. I'm here today I wrote in the local St. Mary's paper, I managed to put an article in there on 2012, January 20th, about the Commer case and the lawsuit. I recently approached the town editor to write again, and his question came up. He's bewildered as to why mainstream media hasn't talked about this. And I originally sent him your comment from the press release. I know you've addressed this question before.
Well, I'll quickly address it if you want me to address it again. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sure, go ahead. And I just wanted to follow that up because I'm also here to kind of, with like-minded people, to see if we could help you out and resolve this and work together on this. I want to hear how other people have, or who has been notified and the difficulties.
All right. Don't tell me what to do when I'm up here. If you want me off, take me off, but do not come up here and whisper instructions in my ear. You got that? Okay, have a seat, please. The answer to that is that the controlled media basically has been given marching orders not to cover the story. And when people say that I'm being a conspiracy theorist on that, well, my answer always is the allegation that I'm engaging in conspiracy theories is that if I'm a conspiracy theorist, then you must be a coincidence theorist. And coincidences are not against the Criminal Code of Canada. Conspiracies are. They're indictable offenses because they happen every day. So the media's been told not to cover this story. This is a bigger story than a lot of cases I've done, and a lot of my cases are front and center, CBC, national news. This is a much bigger story than a Supreme Court judge getting barred from taking a seat, or a terrorism case. That a lot of my stories get covered wall to wall nationally. This story is much bigger than any of them, and it has not been covered by one single mainstream media. Yeah. I'm sorry, he was...
There we go. If you get Supreme Court permission to proceed, where do you start again? Do you have to go back down to the provincial level, or you can...
No, it's in the federal court trial division. We go back to the federal court.
So it goes back to the federal
and then we start the procedure of filing our documents, discoveries, and trial. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Rocco, you go back to court on Monday. How long do you expect this current round to last for? And do you have any estimate or guess on when you'll get a decision from Monday's hearing coming back and when the next step will be?
Well, if they kick my ass out the door with a steel toe boot, it'll be the same day. If not, they'll reserve, and we'll get the decision in the mail in a month or two, 4 or 6 weeks. It could be anything from the same day from the bench saying, thank you for your arguments, but this thing is going away, in which case we go to the Supreme Court, to we'll reserve and we'll get back to you in writing.
And are we looking at like a one-day hearing here, or is this going to go on for a week? Or?
No, it's a half-a-day hearing, just the morning.
Oh, good. I got an appointment at 2. Glad to hear that.
Yeah, we have another question over here from the people that don't have mics. But before we go there, just wanted to make sure that we're in common with the 2-minute rule on asking questions. Like, just take 2 minutes to ask a question, and also we're looking to go toward more of a panel to have the other panelists involved too. So if we can just respect the 2 minutes per question or statement that you want to make. Thanks very much. Go ahead.
Sure. So my question's a little morbid, so you'll have to forgive me. What happens when the plaintiffs go to heaven?
I'm sorry?
What happens when the plaintiffs die? If. I'll say if.
Well, Anne can answer that. Comer's not dying, but,
Okay.
you know.
But I mean, does the case continue even without?
The case can continue. Comer is a plaintiff, and the court's decided that the committee has standing.
Okay, great. Long live Ann Emmett. Thank you.
Could I just say that if I go to heaven, before this thing gets settled, I'll come back and haunt them all.
Okay.
We have one question over here, but is there someone on the floor? Go ahead if you're on the floor. Just press the yellow button.
Yeah, Rocco, I was wondering, I don't know if you've been up with what's going on in Spain, but I think they'd be very interested in what you're doing here in Canada.
Oh, I don't know what's happening in Spain. Educate me. Huh?
Podemos is, this is a political party that started. They won 5 seats. They want to change their constitution, deprivatize everything, all the services within Spain, and they kind of sound like us. So I think we should get you connected.
Yeah. I'm fluent in Spanish.
Well, I'm not, so it was kind of hard to get in touch with them, but I finally got through in French and English.
Okay.
Thanks.
For English. Go ahead, sir. Go ahead, sir.
Money's always important. Is there any fundraising for this or any way people can support? I mean, I think that's a big issue.
Anne can speak to that. I can't because it's against the law for me to speak to fundraising. It's called champerty.
We have been fortunate in not having to do that very seriously to this point, but we're certainly going to have to get serious about it now. Up to this point, Bill Krem has been able to carry the load primarily, but we do receive donations at the moment, and they come to Cummer, addressed to made out to Cummer and addressed to me. And if you would like to know where to send it, please speak to me at the end of the meeting.
Just a quick follow-up. Would Comer qualify as a tax-free, apolitical organization?
Only places like the Fraser Institute qualify.
But the advice I give to clients who want to donate to organizations who don't have a tax number is I say to them, calculate what you would have donated with your tax deduction and how much you would have been out of your pocket after the tax deduction, and just donate that. And you're no worse off.
Another question over here.
Actually, it's a comment. I want everybody to remember that we own all the 12,000 shares of the Bank of Canada. We have been ripped off from our bank. They had no right to do it, and they have to be brought to account. Secondly, please remember that the same people who print our money print the news.
Yeah.
Hi. Just for a quick backup, I had been told, or I was under the impression, that the government had ordered a media blackout on this issue. So correct me if I'm wrong. And the second thing is, has there been any consideration or talk, maybe not with you, Rocco, but Anne with Calmer, about the repercussions for Canada and our credit rating and our, you know, the exchange rate on our money if we did reinstitute the Bank of Canada?
First of all, about government-ordered blackout, I don't have any evidence of that, but my suspicions are that. I don't doubt that there's been a government-ordered blackout. With respect to your other question, you know, it's very hard a question to answer in the abstract. I don't think that it would do anything if the Bank of Canada reinstituted interest-free loans except to solidify our standing. It would make us more viable. All this fear-mongering about inflationary impact and all is just garbage. It's just garbage, you know.
I believe there's a gentleman up here, Jim Karagianis. Go ahead. That's you. Yeah.
Will you be giving a press release after trial on Monday?
Sorry?
Will you be giving a press conference after the trial on Monday?
Usually not. I usually wait for the decision. If some people have questions, I answer them. But you know, there hasn't been any scrums on this case. So. Right. Yeah. Okay.
Are you familiar with what Iceland did as far as once they realized that the central banking Ponzi scheme is a fraud and their government was actually a shadow government and not really representative, that they basically just kicked the central banking out of the country?
Some Italian, yeah, they said.
So why are we not doing that as opposed to asking for permission through a legal forum, which seems, in my opinion, legality is not reality, and I'm not too sure why we're doing it this way, asking permission from the lawyers that are the actual ones that are creating this problem subversely underneath. So why are we not doing a similar format of what Iceland is doing?
Well, the difference in Iceland is the government did it.
Sorry?
The difference in Iceland is the government did it. We're not the government. We don't have that power.
Well, we've just had a proven election fraud that this government sitting doesn't have any validity either, though. So.
Yeah, but you got to get somebody to declare that. As far as the system works, they're sitting there as the government. Nobody else is.
You can't take it upon yourself to extrapolate that way. It's got to be somebody that brings that.
I don't understand your question. We can't do what Iceland did because our government's unwilling to do what Iceland did. It's their government who did what they did.
Okay.
The citizens here can't just take, or a portion of the citizens just can't take it into their own hands and affect what the Icelandic government affected in Iceland. That's why, yeah.
Okay. And is it the Bank of Canada, the one that authorizes the Canada banknote to print the birth certificate bonds?
I'm not familiar with the birth certificate bonds.
Okay. Yeah. And are you? It's my understanding that currency banknotes are checks. Is that your understanding?
The currency?
Banknotes are considered checks.
They're negotiable instruments under the Negotiable Instruments Act, but they're not the same as checks. Checks are basically what we refer to as credits. They're different from currency.
Oh, okay.
Okay, checks go from point A to point B. They're credits. Currency floats freely, is not attached to anything or anybody.
This legal tender isn't backed by anything, so they're actually promissory.
Well, on a very theoretical scale, yes, but they're different from checks. I can give my banknote to anybody in the room. If I want to give a check to everybody in the room, I got to make a check to everybody in the room. They're credits. They're different. They're different instruments. There's different negotiable instruments.
Are you familiar with the Bills of Exchange Act and Consumers Purchases as far as our signature
Well, I'm not going to get into that. I'm familiar with the Negotiable Instruments Act because I did a lot of work under it when I was the Department of Justice lawyer, but there are a lot of misunderstandings on the internet, and that's one of them.
Thanks very much. We have another question up here and one on the floor, so let's go down there first, get a little bit of variety. Press your button and talk.
Hi. I don't really understand much at all what you're talking about.
Neither do I, so you can feel okay?
So I'm basically an activist. Okay. Is it possible that on Monday this whole thing could be squashed?
Yeah.
So that, in other words, the very few people, I've now and then gone to Comer, but all of Canada, all of the activists in this city will have known nothing, heard nothing of this, and it'll all be gone. Without, how come we haven't got the activists of the city, the Sid Ryans of the city, the politicians, that we're not pissed off with this whole thing.
Well, it's subject to going to the Supreme Court. It could be quashed. It's a very complicated question you answer, and to be honest with you, I don't attribute any manure on any flies or vice versa. The problem is that these issues are very complex. They require some thinking through, a lot of thinking through, and quite frankly, 98% of the MPs sitting in the House of Commons are too afraid to touch it for looking stupid. They just don't understand this. It's not their fault. And they don't want to understand it, and so they just simply ignore it. They put their head in the sand, and a lot of the major parties don't want to understand it because they agree with the system at large, including the NDP.
That's what happened in the province of Quebec when the government wouldn't understand why the students were complaining about their debts, the amount of money they had to pay. But they took to the streets and they defeated the government.
Oh, I don't disagree with you, but that takes a certain amount of elevation of consciousness to the issue, focusing on the issue and how it affects them. We don't teach our children very well about finances and the economic system. A lot of the kids going through the school system simply don't understand the economic system. A lot of professionals, a lot of elected officials don't understand. They just don't understand. If you ask anybody for a definition of money, they think they know what it means, but they don't.
Thanks, Dick.
Good afternoon, everyone. My question is, for freedom of speech, you mentioned that the media is not allowed to document any of this process. My question is, what about CNN, other international media? Is able
what
to,
about what? I'm sorry, which CNN? Sorry?
I say, if CNN cover these proceedings, are you allowed to speak to the international media?
I don't understand what international media means.
Well, you mentioned that the media do not have been report this in the main media in Canada at all. And like the gentleman there say, even the politicians, this can go, and no many people will know about it.
No, I know, but when you say international media, I don't understand. The major media is all connected.
Under the spirit of freedom of speech, right?
Right.
And this is a situation going in here with people of Canada.
Right.
If the local media doesn't cover, and the cross Canada is not covered, my question is, can the international media be covered? Will you have a freedom to speak to them?
I understand what you're saying, but I don't know. Give me an example of who you have in mind when you say the international media.
Media in general, but also probably independent media.
Well, the independent media has been covering. If you go on the internet, you'll see independent media covering it. But in terms of large-scale media, or mainstream, for lack of a better word, they don't tend to cover these things. For the same reason, they have the same vested interest in Europe as they do in America and here. Yeah.
Hi, it's Stan again. I have a question for Mike, actually, the postal union guy. I have a curiosity as to how aware your the postal members are of this class action lawsuit in the Bank of Canada, and does the union, when you've got a lot of people, does the union talk about this at their meetings and stuff like that to your members?
As far as I'm aware, we haven't taken any kind of position on a class action lawsuit or really even discussed it throughout the organization, but our members are mobilizing around the demands on postal banking and setting up financial operations at Canada Post. And so there have been a whole lot of discussions at every level of our organization about that, as well as educational pieces, developing of talking points for people to get this out. For us, it's an important issue because it's an alternative vision for the post office, where the government thinks they can, or they're at least trying to sell us this idea that we can cut our way to growth. Instead, we think we need to develop new services in order to bring in revenue to make sure the post office is sustainable in the long run.
Okay, I think he has a follow-up question. One moment, please.
Well, then, you know, and then this case backs up what you guys want to do there. So I'm curious how much you knew of the case before you came here today. And don't you think it's a good idea to tell your members about what you've learned here today on this case of the Bank of Canada, what's being done here?
Absolutely. I wasn't actually aware of this case before coming here today, so this has been very informative, this whole event, and there's absolutely a lot for us to take back to our members.
Hey, Rocco, I just want to clarify something you said, that you worked on you had worked on the Federal Negotiable Instrument Act. I'm not aware of any Federal Negotiable Instrument Act.
The Negotiable Instruments Act is a federal act. Press the button, please. The Negotiable Instruments Act is a federal act.
I was just wondering,
It's a banking act by the federal parliament.
Did you mean the Bills of Exchange Act?
I'm sorry, yeah, the Bills of Exchange.
So you know, okay, so you know then.
There's also a Negotiable Instruments Act.
Okay, so the Bills of Exchange Act, you know then that the birth certificate is mentioned, I think it's in Section 7 as a warrant in the Bills of Exchange Act?
I'm not going to pretend I don't remember every section of the act.
But is the birth certificate mentioned as the warrant? It's a warrant mentioned in the Bills of Exchange Act?
I don't recall.
Don't recall, okay, thank you.
Could I just, which is the mic? Can I just speak to that? The warrant in 1694 was the document that would allow the Bank of England to receive its dividend. And the dictionary that I introduced here today includes the table of contents for the Bills of Exchange Act of 1882. And the dictionary also includes the definitions of negotiable instruments from the Slater Bills, Checks, and Notes document that I refer to as the prayer book of Mammon. Because I've chosen the word prayer book because when these bills are made into law, and when these bills are made into money, and when these bills go into default as a negotiable instrument, they go to the courts, and the holder of the negotiable instrument charges or claims for a complete refund from whoever made it. And that was the essence of my presentation today, that the taxpayer, as part of the corporation's soul, have made your own government responsible to pay for these instruments. And therefore, the government can never refuse this. And this is why John Trichet said signature will be honored. If you put your signature to a negotiable instrument and it goes into a dishonorable state, you are part of the government will pay, that will go into your government deficit. That is the tax arbitrage component of my presentation today.
It wasn't so much a question as answering other people's concerns, like for instance Iceland and stuff like that. I think it's there's too much blame and pointing at politicians and bankers in general when it comes to issues our national security and things of that nature. Whereas, like, we have to understand that we have to create the political will or the public will to get a lot of these issues that we want heard to be heard. Because politicians are people like any one of us, and so are bankers. And unless you're educating yourself on the issues, like, they're not going to know. So it's up to us as the political will, as the public, to create that education system. And for instance, I know there's a lot of things that Comer does that doesn't necessarily get read. And I think as people who are interested in this topic, we should be asking Comer, and maybe that's the question I have at the end of the day, what does Comer need from us to help create the political and public will for these things to actually be heard, you know, in the House of Commons? For instance, like the English House of Commons talked about how money was created just recently in the last year. I think Ukraine is doing that same thing. And a few other countries have just announced that same thing as well. So what can we do as supporters to try and get this to be heard and to be a public issue, to try and get this national coverage?
Well, I know that you and your group certainly are spreading the word. Comer is, for one thing, we have to grow. Numbers were not our game. We were a think tank, but now there are so many tasks to be done. Comer is planning to work at two levels, the level of coalition and the level of community. I think the biggest job has to be done at the level of community with things like public forums and follow-up. And so you can simply, I mean, read what we print. A copy of the Comer Journal goes to every member of Parliament every 2 months. If you have a website, put the information out on there. Wherever you can tell people, do it. Support meetings like this one. Be in touch. For example, there's a lot of information on the Comer.org site. And our Comer Journal is printed there, along with all kinds of reports on the court cases, for example. We're looking to set up another website of a different kind in the near future. It's a matter of getting the word out. And of course, we're also going to have to raise funds. We've never had to do that either. But it's going to cost money to do these things, and that will be helpful.
Okay, a question for Al Rosen to get involved. In your presentation, you were alluding to Nortel. So the question would be, how would we let people know about this accounting fraud and the auditors that are involved, as well as, I guess, the Ontario Securities Commission, given that a lot of pension plans like OMERS, teachers, and so forth were into Nortel?
Well, it's part of the same point about what the media chooses to cover. So I think you start with just talking to your neighbors and explaining to them that it's not what is said. Like, it's just, to me, it's outrageous that comments can be made about the principles involved in this new accounting, that it's better than the old, and on and on and on, and it goes. And I try to do presentations to the big law firms and so on, and it's still a matter of they have heard all the cliches before you even get there. And the public believes these outrageous statements. So I've been trying to get around, and other of our people have been trying to get around to seniors, for example, just to explain to them that it's not what they read in the publications. It's not what they hear on TV. Don't forget, a lot of TV, the ads, who's putting the ads on? So if you go back 5 or 6 years, I didn't have trouble getting on some of these business publications. They asked me, and you get in and you tell the story. But then once the advertiser said, get rid of that bleep, that was the end of it. So you have to overcome that built-in high advertising content, and you do it by speaking really to your friends and explaining to them what's happening. You have to get a buildup of the population to harass the lawmakers. I don't know what else to do.
All right, we'll harass the lawmakers. We have 15 minutes left and 5 or 6 questioners. So Judy, you're next.
Well, I would just like to ask, we've noticed that a lot of this is being recorded. A lot is being recorded. What's the plan to disseminate the recording of this seminar?
I think I can speak to that. I've arranged for a number of audio and video recordings. I was going to put this in my closing remarks, that we will be compiling this. And when I say we, the COMA members, will be able to publish the material as a presentation for the entire seminar. And where things didn't quite work out, technically speaking, and we had to cut short or didn't see videos, we can put those in. It's the same as you can make something look better. And so those will be done, and they will be put onto the internet. I can tell you now the dictionary that I've prepared will be on the websites in England, so it's free. You can look at it. I hope that COMA will put the same dictionary on their website so people can look at that. And all the material will be put out on live web, probably in a week, from a single camera source.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that we can do here in Canada. Trudeau did say in 1982 that Canadians can now amend their constitution, and I think it's high time that we did. In Canada, over 14 million young adults have never participated in a constitutional question, and it's up to us to push that. What we've done is, and I've asked Rocco to look at this, it's the IAQ's Indigenous and Civil Unified Sovereign Enactment for self-governance and self-determination for Canadians to go to a direct democracy system instead of the present false democratic system we have now. So hopefully with what's going to happen on Monday, you know, if all falls short and we have to go, Rocco has to bring that to the federal court, I think we need to take it a step further and start changing our constitution and include the Bank of Canada within that. So that's just something that we want to add. Thank you.
Okay, just a very quick question with regard to ownership of the Bank of Canada. I've heard several comments about the Canadian population owns the Bank of Canada. I was under the impression that the Crown is the ultimate shareholder of the Bank of Canada. If that could be clarified. And secondly, is there only one corporate entity called the Crown, or there seems to be numerous crowns? Thank you.
Well, under the Bank of Canada Act, the Minister of Finance holds the shares in trust for Her Majesty. Her Majesty Her Majesty since the patriation of the Constitution has become a sort of theoretical enigma. In essence, the Minister of Finance holds the shares in trust for Canadians. Whether or not there's various crowns depends on what you're dealing with and what legal issue. There's a doctrine that says for certain purposes the Crown is one and indivisible. Clearly, the Crown is divisible when we're dealing with division of powers under the Constitution. There's a provincial Crown and a federal Crown. So depending on what you're dealing with a different Crown, but it's one and indivisible for certain other things, for instance, charter infringements on individuals.
So who owns the Bank of Canada is a bit of a shell game. Is it safe to say that, or is that a stretch?
Well, no, we own it, but the Minister of Finance holds the shares in trust. The Minister of Finance, under the Bank of Canada Act, contrary to popular misinformation, is the boss, and he's politically accountable to Parliament. You'll hear crap out there that the bank governor is independent of the government. No. If there's a dispute between the government and the Bank of Canada governor, the Minister of Finance, with the approval of Cabinet, can give the Bank of Governor marching orders. It's right there in the statute, and the Bank of Canada governor has to follow them. Yeah.
Next question.
Follow up to that. Is the Minister of Finance personally liable for not following the Constitution?
No, he's not personally liable unless he can, engages in criminal acts or actions outside the scope of his duties. No. The Crown is liable on his behalf, which is us.
I think there's a push to get greater financial literacy in high schools, and I would very much like to see something like CBC Financial, Canada Reads competition on radio to encourage financial literacy in the country.
I know, Tony, Al, would young people be more literate if they went to the CBC?
Well, it's very interesting you've asked that question of me. I can relate to my own upbringing educationally. I was not taught anything to do with money. In fact, I thought it was something of a bit of a joke when I was a child. I have been extremely careless. The judges have told me that, which is rather remarkable, because when they tell me now that I was very foolish and a victim of my own foolishness, that's kind of a compliment, because it means I wasn't a fool before. For example, if I had gone insane and I went to a court for a certificate of sanity, I'd have to prove that I was insane before I got the certificate of sanity. So my education didn't do anything for me in this regard, except to say that as an observer, I've been able to write, and the insane people, it seems to me, are in the courts.
Another quick question someone didn't want to ask personally, but it comes back to the birth certificate. Is there a way to get around it and get under the thumb of the country, Canada?
Are you asking me that question?
That was for Tony.
Yeah, I've got the definitions of the birth certificate and how they're used to make a bondsman of the debt which was created to make money. I can't answer your question because I don't know. All I understand is that we belong to a corporation and we are regarded as the stock. It's a very interesting use of the words, and when you look at the dictionary, you'll find a multiplicity of interpretations. I've already given you indications of what bills are. Bills end up in court, and they end up with pleadings, which are called prayers, and they're answered by judges. All those definitions are in this dictionary, and I hope that that point will add to the education of people if they go to that dictionary. I've made the dictionary because my education was so lacking, and I've been here 70, and I would like my children to understand the dictionary of the money rules.
Okay, we'll check your dictionary. Michael Sinclair.
Thank you. First, my thanks to all the speakers and to the organizers for this very interesting and important event. My question is to Mike. As everybody knows, there's an election coming up sometime between now and October. Mike, what do you understand as to the position on a postal bank by Canada Post by the Liberals and or the NDP?
We've had both Liberals and the NDP have spoken in the House about it and mentioned, or they've criticized the government for not exploring the option instead of going straight to the cuts. I think there's probably more support for the idea in the NDP. I don't know that either party has taken an official stance yet, but both of the major opposition parties have said that it's an avenue that should be explored. I know I've spoken at events all over the place on this, and we've been campaigning on it for some time. We've been getting the information into the hands of members of Parliament. And when we first picked this idea up, when we first started advancing this campaign, it was really starting from zero. When we talked to the parliamentarians, you could just kind of see the eyes glaze over because they didn't really know anything about this. And so it's been a process of education. And I think, neither of the parties were willing to jump in right on board and say, that's a great idea, we'll do it. They need to see the background information, and rightly so. So that's the reason we've been, developing these kinds of studies, getting the information together. We organized an international postal banking symposium last year where we actually brought in experts from all of these different postal banks, from Italy, from France, from Australia, from New Zealand, we had people come from all over the place. And we had some policy makers and people from the different parties come to that. So it's a long process of education, but I think they're getting a lot more comfortable with the idea.
All right, next question.
Not really a question, just kind of a comment for the members of Comer who are here. We send a lot of, well, not a lot, but some young people to the Comer group and to other places. And they come back exasperated because, a lot of Comer's public-facing material is frankly terrible. We're not living in a generation of readers. So promulgating that message to young people is going to require opening up the minds to new ways of approaching this topic. We can't keep going around handing 30 photocopied pages to people to explain this to them. We're going to need an infographic. We're going to need it simplified to a hashtag. And I know that some people go to Comer with those intentions, and they're constantly frustrated. So it's really just more a suggestion. The work you're doing here is some of the most important work in Canada, but you're going to need a new generation of people to take up that mantle for you, and you need to be more receptive to those advances, in my humble opinion.
We're very sensitive to that need, and we are in touch with young people. We are also in the process of setting up another website that will be a very different kind of website from Comer.org.
If I can speak to that briefly, it's a vexing problem in terms of, and I don't disagree with anything you said. However, part of the problem that we're dealing with here is that these issues can't be explained on a hashtag. These issues can't be explained in the electronic way that the new generation is used to. These issues, part of these issues, unfortunately, require patience and literacy. And this is the wall that we bang our head against the wall in terms of trying to explain. And it's no different. I get calls from even alternative media who say, can you explain this to me in a paragraph? And I say, no, I can't. And so that's a really vexing problem. You say, we don't live in a generation of readers? Well, some of this stuff requires reading.
Rocco, is this on? Are there still common law courts or courts of equity in Canada? And if so, since this is affecting men and women and not necessarily just legal persons, why are we appealing to a legal forum to fix this?
I don't understand your question.
Are there common law courts or courts of equity still in Canada?
The courts, the superior courts in Canada are still exercise powers of equity, yes. But they're mostly, they're very rarely do they exercise equity. I think in the last 20 years, the Court of Appeal of Ontario exercised it once for a widow to not foreclose.
So why are you not
house.
claiming a court of equity or a common law court?
Okay, before I answer that, I just want to make a general comment on. I wasn't here for some of the other presentations. I get 5, 6, 7 calls a day from across the country on persons who go on the internet and take partial understanding of certain historical concepts, often out of historical context, and then patchwork them in to the current day. And it's very frustrating, right? Because in that is my favorite line from a Steven Seagal movie, that assumptions are the mother of all fuck-ups. Okay, so we have to, now hang on. I understand that, but you can't take a historical context which no longer is viable in present-day society and then marry it to a common concept and another one without following the track. All courts of equity means is that the law is written down in statutes, And then the judges interpret that statutory law, including making common law rules where things fall between the cracks. And when the law is such an ass that it inflicts injustice, we can ignore the law for that particular case and give relief to that particular person. But that's a rare remedy. You can't apply equity as a general replacement for law.
Law meaning what?
The statute, the Constitution, the statute, and the interpretation of the Constitution and the statute by the courts in the jurisprudence, the common law. That's what the common law is. It's the courts making rules where none exists so that they can deal with the situation at hand. All courts of equity means, in the old days they were separate. So if you lost a case in the court of law, you went across the street to the court of equity and say, I need relief. Now, when in our constitutional framework, those two courts are the one and the same. Our courts exercise both law and equity. Even the federal court, which is a statutory court, can exercise equitable principles in dispensing of the law. But an equitable remedy is an extremely rare remedy when the effect of applying the law really creates a harsh, intolerable injustice. Okay, so there is no court of equity you can go to. It's the same courts. Okay.
I was under the impression that a statute was just a codified law.
Well, that's what it is, yeah. It's the law that Parliament brings down, yeah. And before the Constitution, we lived in a system of parliamentary supremacy. Parliament could do what it wanted, even if they were being a jackass. Now, we live in a system of constitutional supremacy where even Parliament has to govern us and itself within constitutional constraints. Right. Okay.
Well done. Answering the question of education, a lot of my students are here today. For 15 years, I have been teaching a free course at the University of Toronto. I will have 2 lectures in February, and I have been teaching monetary history, which is never taught, and the structure of the Bank of Canada, and monetary reform in general. I am a member of Cummer. I've done many talks to the city and in the legislature, and if anyone is interested in coming to the free course, and I see about 20 of my students here, please see me in the lobby, and I will give you the phone number to call. Trust me, people who come out of my course have written to the Bank of Canada. They're wonderful activists, and this is a free course. My name is Sydney White, and I'm on the net under Sydney White Studies in Propaganda, which is the name of the course. And the most propaganda, as you all know, is about money. Thank you.
All right, so you're the last question because you haven't had a chance. Go.
Okay, do you want more bodies in the court on Monday, or do you consider it irrelevant, you know, in the spectators gallery?
I don't know. Anybody interested in the case has a right. It's a public court, open to the public. I don't invite or de-invite anyone. I simply present the case for my clients. Okay, so.
Okay, is it going to be in a large courtroom this time, or
it's a courtroom 7, which is the Court of Appeal. It's the biggest courtroom they have.
Okay, thanks.
It's 180 Queen Street West. Earlier, I was speaking to Krista Wong-Tam, and she mentioned that there are budget deputations at City Hall. We know that the federal government's delayed their budget, which means the province isn't going. We've had 60, 70 people come in and out, so if you're a resident of Toronto, you're allowed to speak on the budget. We know that on the issue of homelessness, there's 5,200 people living on the streets and another 20, 30,000 living on people's couches. So if you want to address community services rather than funding the police or spending money on debt charges, these are things that could be raised because the city might borrow $86 million from the province of Ontario. If we had a Bank of Toronto, we wouldn't have to do that. So I'm going to pass on to Tony Crawford to close.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to just say a couple of words. First and foremost, I'd like to end on the F word, which we heard a few minutes ago, connected to assumptions. And I'd like you all to shout the F word, which is fraud. Fraud! And the fraud, louder! David, I'd like you to just put up how much debt we've incurred over this meeting and have it compared, if you would, to the 2 o'clock when I started after the closing. Are you able to do that? Yeah. While we do that, I want to first and foremost thank you all for attending. And I want to give special thanks to Judy Lewis and Ann Emmett for organizing this, along with Fred Stevens and Sonny Young as our moderators. And this is an extraordinary event, and it's due to the hard work of those people. I'd like to just thank Christine Montam for her efforts to make this facility available to us, which is absolutely first rate, and it's one of the public assets that belongs to the public, and that's why we are here. And if you want to do something like this again, this may be the example to do it by. Christine Montam is our closest voice to government to promote the benefits of public banking. I'd like to thank Ann Emmett, who's the closest voice to the justice system for Canadians to reclaim the Public Bank of Canada. I would like to thank Al Rosen, who is our closest voice to financial institutions to break through the fallacious accounting and illegal Ponzi schemes. And Alan Blaine, although he couldn't come, I want to thank him because of his closeness to launching public banking in Canada. And Mike Pelacek for his outstanding presentation, and he's our closest voice to restoring the public faith in the financial services across the nation. And Rocco Galati, who is our voice in support of Commerce Action. He has a plan to force the government to use the Canadian bank. And finally, I just want to thank David Lowe, my buddy, and Andy Martin for their technical support to make all our speakers feel comfortable at this event, take a recording of it in order that we can republish this material with a few edits here and there to make it available for public viewing on the web. Thank you all for coming.
All right, just some fun housekeeping. Take all the literature that you have in garbage and help us clean up. We have until 5 p.m. to leave here. And I encourage you to network with other people. This is the converted, this is the choir. It's good to have group therapy, so I thank you for your time.
Is it was?
Anyway, it just shows the numbers.
And then we have a sheet in front.
We're doing this again. We need more practice.
Well, it's remarkable how well we've done without practice. But I shall expect miracles with the videos and audios.
We'll see what we can do. We can only do our best. And once we've done our best, we're done. That was sitting here originally, but I guess the guy up there is the owner. Yeah. Not that one. Yeah, again. Just these two. Yeah. Yes.